Hey, John Gilroy here. Today, a company with 30 years of success in the commercial world doubles down on helping federal agencies apply AI to complex federal projects. Let's sit down with NWN. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Our guest today is Nabil Amiri, Vice President of Business Development for Federal Practice at a company called NWN. Nabil, not too well known in the D.C. area is NWN. That's why we're here, right?
That's exactly right, John. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, there are people that, everyone knows the standard suspects here in town here. And I think this company has really got a good story to tell. So I decided to bring Nabil in and talk about what they can do to help the federal government, specifically with artificial intelligence. And this is going to be like an introductory interview. We're going to start with the big mountaintops, maybe talk about zero trust, maybe talk about automation, and then touch on visibility. So in the pre-interview, I talked to you, and you were an auditor for the federal government. Is that correct?
That's exactly right, John.
So maybe you've seen some problems, and hopefully the problems can be solved with the offerings from NWN. Tell us about the company. Give us a little snapshot, please.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. And I don't think I could do it justice without talking about the leverage acquisition that we made 10 months ago. And, in this instance, the old saying is really true. 1 + 1 can really equal 3. And, by acquiring leverage, we instantly gain decades of experience in delivering secure networks to tactical and classified field environments where, downtime isn't inconvenient. It's dangerous.
Really? I mean, and I'm in the D.C. area. If I go down to the DOD and I talk about resilience, I'm going to get if I say audit, I'm not going to get an audience. But resilience, I'm going to get an audience. So what has the experience been with leverage? Have they primarily worked with the federal government in the DOD?
Yeah. So, leverage has kind of this long history in not only working with the DOD, but also the civilian agencies, the intel agencies, federal healthcare agencies. And really, what the acquisition why the acquisition was so compelling for us, John, was because leverage's strengths align so perfectly with NWN's kind of broader vision, right? So, here at NWN, we've built this sort of comprehensive offer that includes things like intelligent connectivity, security, collaboration, devices, et cetera. And, by integrating leverage into that, we didn't just add capabilities. For us, we really expanded the range and depth of how we can serve our federal customers. So you could say quite literally, we are leveraging this transition. And more importantly, we're using it as kind of a springboard to grow our impact in the federal space.
I'm kind of thinking of NFL football. There's a team in the West Coast, team in the East Coast, let's say New England Patriots, and they bring in a star quarterback. All of a sudden, they're going to the Super Bowl. So maybe that's what we have here. We have a combination now. NWN, very well-known company in the commercial area. It's in New England, very strong, has all kinds of experience. And so how did they figure that it works so well together?
I think for us, we've had such success in the commercial space, right? And that's given us kind of a deep well of experience when it comes to sort of driving innovation at scale. But, in acquiring leverage and bringing them into the fold, it's given us muscle to operate in the federal arena where, compliance isn't just a box to check, it's quite foundational. And so, what that means now is that we kind of have this world-class organization that's very fluent in the broad range of federal requirements. So whether we're talking things like FedRAMP or STIG or JITC or the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? We have experience in architecting environments that don't just meet these requirements, but it frankly exceeds them. And so when you start to kind of contrast both commercial and federal, right? I think that too often, federal IT leaders, they sort of view innovation and compliance as opposing forces. And, our belief is that they don't necessarily have to be.
Well, STIG is the word that most people outside the D.C. area don't know much about, but and I know a little bit about it. So essentially the concept is that if you have an organization with many different types of operating systems, the operating systems have to be updated, and each specific instance of an operating system going to have different links and connections. This gets to be you need more than one whiteboard for this. You need 100 whiteboards to have all the connections. And so I would think in the commercial world, this is a difficult task, but in the DOD, this almost gets to be impossible because you have all these security complications involved. So how can you just jump into the world of STIG? Is this blindfolded? I mean, this is a tricky business.
I think you make some great points there, John. I think for us, it's the decades of experience that, we've operated in the federal space. And, we really rely upon that with kind of like a forward-looking lens into what's currently happening within the federal government, right? It's no secret that federal budgets are being slashed. There's been a large reduction in workforce. And so, how do we solve that? And I think that starts with kind of leaning into concepts like modernization, for example, right? So, if we look at kind of the current state of, an example of a federal IT agency, you have typically legacy systems, you have constrained budgets, you have shifting mandates, you have aging infrastructures. And really where our strength lies is that we help them prioritize what matters. We reduce that complexity, we consolidate tools, and we move towards kind of a scalable platform that evolves with the mission.
So you mentioned budget reduction. I think that's the phrase that pays here in 2025. And so if a company actually knows how to automate systems, this cannot be a hindrance for them because they'll take and be able to automate. But there's always kind of problems. I mean, if you try to automate STIG, you're going to get many problems with different operating systems, aren't you?
No, that's such a great point, right? And so when let's talk about the many different systems piece because I love this conversation topic. A decade ago, the big thing within IT and frankly federal IT was the single pane of glass, right? That was the big buzzword a decade ago, and now here we are a decade later, and everyone has 20 different single panes of glass, right? And so every new tool that was promised to kind of simplify things and do this or that, they've frankly added layers of complexity, duplication, and cost. And the issue then becomes, okay, if I have all these disparate tools, I think it was a GAO report that came out and said, on average, most federal IT organizations have about a couple dozen different security tools. That's not manageable at all, right? And that sort of fragmentation doesn't just waste money, it actually weakens an agency's security posture, right? For us, kind of our expertise is rationalizing all that, right? Let's tighten the integration. Let's give real visibility across the board because when you have all these different systems and frankly different teams that there's overlapping sort of use cases and that are not being taken advantage of, and it's not just a management problem; it's a security nightmare, right? So when we talk about kind of the audit piece of it all, you can't secure what you can't see, is what I like to say.
Which is the strength of NWN, is visibility.
Yep.
Yeah. The story that I like, and I talk to federal leaders, and they say, well, I got tool A, B, and C, and then we want to upgrade and get tool D because it handles IPv6, and all of a sudden that limits the abilities of tool B. And so this is a chess match where 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and then sideways. And then I think just the knowledge of capabilities of these 12 tools, and I think in the commercial world it's probably 40 tools, but just the knowledge of the strengths and weaknesses of each one of these tools, that may be that may be visibility itself.
No, you're certainly right. I think the end goal and really kind of one of our core key strengths is that we're able to work with an agency and when we talk about budget reduction, right? This is an example I love to give, right? In the current climate and the current state of things, modernization, unfortunately, has taken a little bit of a backseat, right? And so if we consider that fact and, you have kind of these federal IT leaders that have key initiatives in areas like zero trust, for example, right? Zero trust a decade ago, that was a very abstract concept that everyone was keen on doing it, but they didn't really know how to execute. And today it's kind of become table stakes, right? Today, zero trust doesn't necessarily just exist in kind of your security tools, but it should be everywhere, right? And so when you think about things like cloud or collaboration or infrastructure, we need to apply zero trust to these elements as well. So, I certainly do agree with you, John.
John Kindervag, by the way, was the originator of Zero Trust. We're having him on the podcast next month. We're getting back in touch. I have him on every couple of years just to touch base. And now all of a sudden, he was the voice crawling out. Remember screaming in the wilderness, this is the best way, this is the best way, this is the best way. Now people are slowly starting to listen to him. I don't know if you ever watch the Olympics. They have Olympic swimming, they have swim lanes, and many companies in this town talk about swim lanes and say, no, identity, that's not my swim lane. No, that's encryption, that's not my swim lane. So what are the lanes you get to evolve? I guess visibility is one, and zero trust is one. So what are the lanes you like to work in? Modernization, would that be one?
Modernization is definitely key to what you do in federal IT. I will say this, swim lanes is such an interesting concept, right? And it's sort of like a ubiquitous term within the federal government where it's a term that contractors and agencies use to kind of organize roles and responsibilities, right? And for us here at NWN, I think we view it as kind of a starting point and not necessarily the finish line. For us, we're more focused on outcomes rather than these kind of rigid categories. And what I mean by that is, the mission always comes first, right? And so if we work backwards from the agency's goals rather than trying to do tech for tech's sake, generally the outcomes are much more aligned with what the agency is trying to go after. So to answer your question directly, what are some of the swim lanes that we excel in or operate in? I think for us, our capabilities really span the entirety of the stack, right? So, if we start at layer one in kind of our intelligent connectivity practice, all the way to things like infrastructure modernization, secure collaboration, cybersecurity services, zero trust, frankly, we're capable and experienced in delivering and all that. The one thing that I'll say, right, in the instances in which we're not, we have this really amazing group of ecosystem partners that in the instance in which the mission or the acquisition strategy calls for something else. For example, small business, small disadvantaged business, or even a specialized technology partner, we're able to pivot and bring those folks in as well.
My last interview was with a gentleman from Microsoft, and during the interview, he said, "There's so much going on with AI and Microsoft, I can't keep up." and he works for Microsoft. and so I told him, take and curate 5 articles on AI just for Microsoft and let people like Nabil and me try to get an idea what's going on. So how does someone like you, you have to understand what's going on in AWS and Google and then Microsoft, of course, and 5 other things. So do you limit yourself to specific companies or maybe just companies you partner with on projects? So how do you pick and choose how to spend your 24-hour day?
Gosh, that's such a great question. So, I think for us, we take a very vendor neutral mission first approach to all this. And what I mean by that is it's not necessarily about pushing a single technology or a single vendor, but more so about bringing together the right set of capabilities to allow the agencies to achieve the secure, compliant, and impactful outcomes that they're after. So, when we try to step back and take a look at kind of our partner ecosystem, it's really about finding partners with strengths in, frankly, the front of mind topics for federal IT leaders, right? Things like zero trust, things like AI, things like machine learning for mission analytics, edge computing in tactical environments, right? The list goes on and on. We work with a very diverse ecosystem. And, that spans kind of the well-established technology partners, right? Some of the ones that you'd previously mentioned, all the way to kind of innovative emerging tech firms. And I think as long as these firms share our commitment to the mission, to security, to compliance, I think we're eager and excited to work with them. And you sort of have to be, John, right? Like the federal IT landscape is so rapidly changing. It's so complex. And these agencies need solutions that allow them to keep up. And so I think that's why our ecosystem approach is so important. It allows us to kind of integrate best-in-class technology solutions across multiple domains and give these agencies a very cohesive, future-proof sort of platform that they can rely on.
So I got up early this morning and I turned to my computer and typed in nwn.ai. I started reading your press releases. I went to Twitter, of course. I went to LinkedIn. I went to YouTube, and I have some themes, and I think we talked about the theme. Zero trust is a theme that comes up with you guys. We know that. Visibility comes up. That's a keyword that comes up. Automation, good or bad, ugly or sad, it comes up. But a phrase that comes up, which really kind of surprised me, was streamlined tech procurement. And I said, well, maybe you have the solution, but the obstacle isn't the solution. The obstacle is getting maybe an acquisition professional to understand why this product is this solution. I mean, I've seen this happen many times. The problem is how can they figure out what's going on? So really, can you guys help streamline tech procurement too? I mean, that's the hardest one, I think.
Believe it or not, John, not only can we do it, we've done it, right? I think, even if we just look back to just a few short years ago, right? COVID, what happened then? Well, we had all of a sudden these federal agencies that, frankly speaking, they had zero interest in kind of a remote workforce, right? That was a bit of an unknown, right? That was for kind of the enterprises and the commercial entities of the world. And so, for us on the drop of a dime, you had these agencies that had to very quickly enable a very large remote workforce. And our acquisition strategy and our strengths in acquisition was largely what made that possible. And don't get me wrong, like the technological component of that and the engineering expertise that went along with that was incredibly important. But, one of the real advantages in working with NWN is how easy we are to engage, right? And so, we're accessible through a number of different GWACs, things like GSA, SOUP, DLA, TLS, and the list goes on. And, this allows those agencies to bring us in quickly and compliantly when you have things like, COVID or even a cyber incident or anything that requires kind of a quick turnaround.
Because we don't know what the next COVID is going to be. Is it going to be an earthquake? Is it going to be, aliens landing in New Jersey? I mean, we just don't know. And so if you understand a company that's this flexible, which I think that's what's interesting about NWN. I mean, I would think a 30-year-old company going to be kind of stuck in its ways. No, they're flexing and understanding a lot with AI. And I got to ask you this AI question because it hasn't come up yet. It's mandated. I have to say AI every 30 seconds or something. But I think we're at a inflection point with AI. I think people are sick of the dazzle. It's like, Nabil, I'm sick of the dazzle. It's all fine. Zippity-doo. Yeah. So how can it help me specifically do a specific task? And so that's what I'm going to leave you with here is going to toss to you and say, okay, you got a good experience. You've got all kinds of, interesting people, topics and subjects. So how can you take AI and just take one maybe topic, maybe visibility? So how does AI help with visibility in the federal government? How can you implement AI to help people at labor with visibility? Just to throw out an agency.
Yeah. So, if we take AI and I'll touch on the visibility piece, but I would certainly love to have like a broader discussion around AI. AI within visibility, we talked about the existing kind of federal enterprise, and there's legacy systems, there's a hybrid workforce, there's remote users, the list goes on. And it's quite difficult for a human or kind of a manual process to come in and kind of correlate all that data. And so really what AI does in that instance, right, is it helps sort of these federal agencies analyze real-time data from things like their network, from their applications, from their endpoints, and it enables them to detect anomalies proactively before these things become outages, right? Because the moment you have an outage in a critical entity like a federal agency, that's a huge deal, right? Downtime is simply not an option for federal agencies, and that's kind of the promise of AI is it's intended to prevent that.
There's a whole many whole list of topics we can delve into here. We can talk about this whole idea of code. We can talk about AI native. We can talk about cloud native, and there's many areas to go down. Maybe our next interview, we can take maybe one of these specific topics, maybe rogue agents, just talk about agentic AI and rogue agents. There's a half-hour conversation there of what's going on. And I imagine the next time we talk, it's going to be changed again. So that's interesting. So looking to the future, 5 years from now, give me a prediction. AI bust? Is it going to be a success? Is it going to be way limited? Or, we had one administration that talks about being very careful with AI. This administration says, forget about it. Just go for the innovation. So put your thinking cap on and tell me 5 years from now, what's the solution going to be?
John, it's a great question. And I think for me, we see AI as truly foundational, and it's already frankly shaping the way that federal agencies operate today, and it's going to continue to transform on how they deliver on their mission objectives, right? And so if we take a step back and look right? You have on one side agencies that are just beginning to play with large language models and sandbox environments. And on the other side, you have agencies that are deploying AI across enterprise workloads and embedding it into national security and scientific operations. And, so for us, we pride ourselves on being able to meet these agencies wherever they're at on their AI journey. And, it's not about chasing AI as a trend. It's truly about making it useful. And I think we're going to continue to see AI usage evolve in the federal government. And we're excited to kind of lead the way by the federal agencies that we work with.
Well, great. That's a good perspective on NWN. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Nabil Amiri, Vice President of Business Development for Federal Practice at NWN.